Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of the series on flow. In the last episode, we spoke about Csikszentmihalyi's early life and some of the factors that influenced the development of the theory of flow. In the second episode, we're going to jump ahead a little bit and speak about how the theory developed and some of the findings from Csikszentmihalyi's interviews. So, just to recap briefly, Csikszentmihalyi was interested in activities that people did for no reason other than participation's sake. So, activities that were their own reward. And he wanted to interview people who participated in such activities and see both what their experiences were and what the characteristics of those activities were. So, we're going to speak a little bit about what he found in those interviews. And this is the bread and butter of the theory of flow. If you're quite familiar with flow, this will also be familiar to you. So, I'm not going to add a ton of my own commentary here or dive into some of the issues which have surfaced more recently in flow research. I'm just going to do my best to give a overview of these aspects of the theory of flow. And if you're not familiar with them, I think they are actually quite useful. You can learn something from them. Despite any issues that we'll bring up later on, they are still very useful for being able to experience flow and understand what type of a concept it is. So as we've said, flow is an optimal state. Csikszentmihalyi defines it almost a little bit circularly, just to say this is some of the best experiences that people have. And the reason that he makes that claim is because people keep coming back to these activities. He just kind of says, let's take people at their word. They keep doing these things. They tell us they like them. But let's see what they experience, why they like it, and what type of activities these things are. So, a kind of basic definition is that flow might be an enjoyable experience of full absorption in an activity in which the demands are perceived as optimally compatible with one's skills. We'll unpack that a little bit. So, from Csikszentmihalyi's original interviews with people who had participated in autotelic activities, he developed this nine-dimension framework. The nine-dimension framework is taken directly from these descriptions and accounts of experiences autotelic activities, and it gives us a way of thinking about both what people experience and what these activities are and why they lead to flow. So it's broken up into two sections. First, we have the antecedents or preconditions, and there's sort of a hint towards causality here. We'll get more into that later, but the antecedents are important for understanding how and why flow emerges. And the second group is the characteristics or descriptors. So these relate more directly to the experience themselves. They're taken from the way people describe these activities and what they experience during them. So the first and probably the most well-known, perhaps most well-researched, is that you need some balance between skills and challenges. So the way that this is most commonly depicted is in this little graphic that you can see in the lower left corner where you have challenges on one axis and skills on the other. And if you have sort of low challenges and low skills, you are unlikely to be very invested in the activity. There's a lot of things that we're not very good at, that they're not very challenging. I could climb up onto the couch and jump up and down. It wouldn't be particularly difficult. I'm not particularly skillful at it. There's not a lot of reason that I would do that. So we could probably come up with nearly infinite activities in this lower left quadrant. Moving over to the right side, there's things that we're quite good at, but they're not particularly challenging. So say walking, right? That might be an example where it doesn't provide a lot of challenge under normal circumstances. It's just sort of something that we take for granted we can do, or even if we move it up a notch, perhaps a very low level of an activity, playing a sport at a very recreational level, that we have more skills than the demands of the activity. And this was initially characterized as boredom, but actually, upon further reflection, more research, they added in relaxation because it does appear that sometimes people do enjoy these situations where they have more competence than the situation demands. They can actually even find it quite relaxing in some cases. It's not going to fulfill your need to be challenged. If we move diagonally up to the top left side, we see anxiety, right? So that's when the challenges exceed your skills. So if you play a sport, if you're to go perhaps to play at professional level, or if you're trying to do something that you're really not capable of, you're going to sense that you're going to have a sense of anxiety. And then finally, in this upper right-hand quadrant, is flow. Flow is not only a balance of challenges and skills, but it seems to increase as both challenges and skills increase. So sort of this high skills, high challenges area of that graphic is what's typically associated with flow, right? And Csikszentmihalyi says, well, maybe it's not like just a linear pathway. Maybe you get better at the activity and then it becomes a little bit boring. It's not challenging. You move up a level. Maybe then it becomes anxiety provoking. You move back, your skills increase and then it becomes quite relaxing again. And you end up maybe in flow after sort of meandering through this little graphic. So this is one of the more well-known and quite heavily studied areas of flow. And it is still a very intuitive way of thinking about the concept. And if you want to experience more flow, you should probably think first about what things you've invested a bit of time in that you have some skill in. That's not really rocket science to say that's where you're going to be able to experience flow, particularly when your skills are challenged by the task. The next one is clear goals. And this is a little bit ironic because clear goals is maybe not clearly defined, but it does seem that there needs to be some non-contradictory goals, and you need those to create feedback. You need something that you're aiming for to be able to know if you're on the right path. And of course, there's whole literature on different types of goals that people use with different timescales and different relationships to activity. But for now, we'll just say that we do need usually some type of goal. And the third and final antecedent or precondition is immediate feedback. And this is quite an interesting one. And I've put this image here of two martial artists because I think that gives us a really clear picture of what might be meant by feedback, right? As you're participating in this activity, well, how do you know if you're doing well? There's different ways feedback could be interpreted. One way would be a sort of a normative sense in which maybe somebody's telling you, oh, good job, or that's not so great, right? Maybe a verbal feedback from a coach. And there are some points where it's interpreted this way, but more often this is used to imply some sensory feedback. So those are the three preconditions or antecedents: a balance of challenges and skills, clear goals, and immediate feedback. Those are still three solid things to keep in mind if you'd like to experience more flow. Think about any activity that you're participating in and ask yourself if those three things are met. Now we have 6 characteristics or descriptors, and these relate more directly to the phenomenology of flow. So very briefly, phenomenology is a philosophy or school of thought that deals with experience. And if we remember back to the first episode, we said that Csikszentmihalyi was a little bit upset when he went to study psychology. There was a big emphasis on behaviorism, and behaviorism did not like to look at experience because it thought that, well, how do you know what experience is? It's kind of internal. Let's just study what we can see. So the observables of behavior. And that was behaviorism. Csikszentmihalyi is much more fond of phenomenology, right? And phenomenology is quite a diverse and complex philosophical school. So I'm not going to go all the way into it here. But if I say phenomenology, I just mean the way that somebody directly experiences something. So trying to get as close as possible to what somebody experienced in a given moment. So the first one of these is a merging of action and awareness. And this is maybe my favorite, and I think one of the most important ones. And as we get into later episodes, you probably see why I like this one. But this is something that also came out of these interviews, is that people feel like their awareness relates very closely to their action. So if we imagine perhaps a situation where that's just not the case, like if you're daydreaming, right? Maybe you're lying on the couch, your eyes are closed, and you're thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow after you get off of work, your awareness is not very closely related to your action. But this is about as far from flow as we can get. So flow seems to describe instances where we are very closely coupled to what we're doing. So our immediate actions in the world are the same things that we're aware of. So, for example, a surfer might be aware of their body position in relation to the wave, how the wave is moving, what that feels like. And it's very dynamic, right? It's kind of encoded right into the term flow that it's very close to action. And a lot of flow activities do involve quite a lot of action and movement. The second one, and this is also a very important one, is total concentration on the task at hand. Another way of saying this is that flow is largely an attentional phenomenon. It has something to do with being very absorbed or immersed in the task. And it's kind of a single-minded focus. We're doing one thing and one thing only. It's kind of the opposite of being scattered and thinking about many things or multitasking. We're sort of all in on one activity. And Csikszentmihalyi tends to refer to this and he likes this term psychic investment, right? And he uses psychic not to mean like a fortune teller, but just to mean mental energy expenditure. He uses these terms of sort of a financial metaphor that you're investing heavily into this activity. He also does say something interesting. He's not particularly happy with the theories of attention that are available to him. So he makes a comment that he says, well, maybe we need a new theory of attention to be able to make progress and flow. So we'll come back to that in future episodes, but we'll just bookmark that for now. The next descriptive characteristic is a transformation of time, sometimes called time dilation. And this is an interesting one. It's sometimes a little bit disputed because there's different ways we could think about this, but there is something to the idea that people report certain experiences as doing something funny with time. And a common one that you'll hear people talk about is car accidents where it feels like things slow down. That's not to say that a car accident is a flow experience, but that's a sort of a common one that people speak of. Another familiar reference might be in the movie The Matrix, right, where he's dodging all the bullets, right? He sees everything in slow motion. There's a famous quote about the hockey player Wayne Gretzky that he saw the game in slow motion, right? And then at another scale, there's the idea that flow activities might pass by much more quickly than they seem. So you might be surfing for 2 hours and not realize that that amount of time had passed. So it's just sort of this idea that our typical sense of time distorts during these activities. We're not aware of clock time the way that we typically are in other activities. Sense of control is also an important descriptor of flow. One way of thinking about this is that you'd be unlikely to experience flow, say flipping a coin, or something that you have no control over. You could see some of these start to link together, right? Because you have a sense of control that's going to relate to your skill. It's also going to relate to having feedback. If you have a high degree of skill and you are connected to the feedback, that lets you know how this activity is going, you will quite likely have a sense of control. In the way it's used in the flow literature, it also sometimes is used to describe this experience of feeling like the right things just happen in the right way. It just feels like you're almost standing outside of yourself and watching yourself perform. In context of music, sometimes this is called the performer witness phenomenon, where people felt like they were just standing outside of themselves and everything was going really smoothly. Moving on, we have a loss of self-consciousness. So one of the characteristics of flow is that people seem less likely to reflect on themselves while they're in flow. They have fewer self-critical thoughts, less what we'd call normative judgments of thinking like, oh, am I good at this? Am I bad at this? What do people think about me? They tend to be just completely focused on the task and what's needed to fulfill the demands of the task. And flow experiences are demanding enough. You don't really have the time to think about all these other things until perhaps afterwards. Now, we could see we're already moving into some pretty heavy duty philosophy. We're asking, well, self-consciousness, what is the self? What does it mean for a self to be conscious? What does it mean to have an experience where that is not the case? So this is a descriptor that has been criticized a little bit because it does require the participant to kind of become a philosopher to answer these questions about what self-consciousness means to them. It's unclear if that means the same thing to all different people, particularly across different cultures. It's quite a vague term. Finally, we have autotelic experience. So this is sometimes not included because it's almost definitional of flow, right? This was just the grounds upon which Csikszentmihalyi built this whole theory, right? This is what he was looking to investigate. So sometimes it's not included. I do like to include it because it is important to remember that these activities are things that people come back to for not really a lot of reason other than their experience in the activity itself. So they are a self-rewarding pursuit. There's something that people do without needing to be paid or rewarded in terms of fame or prestige or things like that. So those are the 9 dimensions of flow. So you can think back through those and reflect and see which activities you participate in that you think fit the most of those. When have you experienced the most flow in your life, and what you might be able to do to experience more. Before I end this episode, I thought I would just speak briefly on a few limiting conceptions of flow. So I'm not going to say that these are wrong, but I'm going to just kind of go out on a limb and say I think that these are perhaps not the best ways that we could think about flow. And one of those has to do with the fact that flow is often sold as a sort of a product to CEOs to kind of hack productivity and just kind of have these superhuman powers to be able to focus for 8 hours without looking up from your computer and be 1,000 times more productive. Unfortunately, there is quite a lot of commercialization around the concept of flow. I think it's fair to be somewhat skeptical of things that people sell under the terminology of flow. I think it's unlikely that flow is something that can be 100% experienced on demand, something that you can just push a button and make it happen. I don't think it's something that we can 100% just biohack or take some magic capsule or something to create an instantaneous flow experience. And we'll get into why I think that in some of the later episodes. On the other end of the spectrum, flow is also not just pleasure. So it is an enjoyable experience, but it's not just the emotion of being happy or the pursuit of pleasure, which is sometimes called hedonism. It's also not only just play, right? Which that's kind of a tricky one because it is related to play. And Csikszentmihalyi actually early in his career does some work on play and sometimes refers to the play experience as he's discussing flow. One of the things that moves him a little bit away from the domain of play is that he feels that it's been set in distinction to work, that it's kind of just meaningless things that you do when you're just on your free time. It's not really the important parts of life, it's just your throwaway time. And he actually has some research that shows people experience more flow at work than during their own relaxation time. So it's not only just play, it's not just pleasure, and it is not just productivity at work. So if you'd like to know more about flow, I'd say some of the key sources would be Csikszentmihalyi's 2 most well-known books. His first book, Beyond Boredom and Anxiety, his book Flow, and another one, a more recent book, is Advances in Flow Research by Pfeffer and Engesser. It's sort of a compilation of modern flow research and where the field is going with some of those questions that we will dive into in later episodes. So that's all for today. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. As always, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe, and we will start diving into some of the trickier issues of flow in the next few episodes.